Now, the point after, with Joe McConnell and Paul Hornick. A review of today's Viking game, plus a look around the National Football League. The point after is brought to you by Union Carbide, makers of the ever-ready alkaline power cell. Come to the top with our best, longest-lasting power source for radios, cameras, and cassettes. The ever-ready alkaline power cell. Here's Joe McConnell.
Well, we're back at a happy Metropolitan Stadium on a gray Saturday late in December, where the Viking faithful are now walking all over the field. They're putting the tarp on it right away. But they're celebrating a 30-14 victory over the St. Louis Cardinals, which moves the Vikings into the NFC title game for the second consecutive year. They'll host it here a week from tomorrow against the winner of tomorrow's game in Los Angeles against the Rams and the Washington Redskins. And, of course, the winner of that one represents the NFC in Super Bowl IX down in New Orleans on January 12. The Vikings have been there twice with no cigar. Of course, they'd love to go back a second straight year. And, Paul, you know, in the previous Super Bowl ball games, the team that has gone back the second year has always won. And the Vikings themselves said that after last year, they really had no way of knowing just what it was going to entail, all the hoopla and everything, plus the 2-week layoff prior to a Super Bowl game, and they felt that the circus atmosphere down there might have made a big difference in their game, and this ball club is very anxious to go back and try to redeem themselves.
They sure are. Of course, they've got the experience, Joe, and it really comes in handy in the playoffs. And I really think that was the edge for the Vikings today coming into this football game. The team with the more experience usually makes the fewest amount of mistakes in a game of this magnitude. And the Vikings, of course, 2 turnovers there in the second half really spelled the differences. The Vikings came up with 10 points within 1 minute of play there in the third period, and that was all she wrote for the St. Louis Cardinals.
The Cardinals played it very tough for most of the first half. In fact, should have had at least a 3-point lead at halftime. Bakken missed that short field goal, and that's got to give a ball club a big lift, particularly the Vikings. I mean, to have a fellow like Bakken miss a relatively short field goal attempt going down to the final seconds of the first half, and this ball game was definitely a different game in the second half.
It sure was. Again, the Minnesota Viking defense, Joe, was just absolutely outstanding. The passes that Hart really completed, and you're talking about the yardage, he really got about 75 yards against the prevent defense with 2 minutes to go in the first half, and he came back with maybe about 70 yards to go with 2 minutes to go in the game when the game was completely out of hand. So actually, the toughness of that Minnesota Viking defense really was not tested as far as the St. Louis Cardinals is concerned, because they picked up almost half of their yardage when it really didn't amount to anything.
Okay, Paulie, we'll be back with more of the point after, but right now, this time out.
If you use ordinary batteries in your camera and they quit too soon to suit you, come to the top. If you use your radio almost all the time, but you don't want to be buying batteries all the time, come to the top of the Ever-Ready line. Come to the Ever-Ready Alkaline Power Cell, our best, longest-lasting power source. No ordinary battery ever made works so hard, so long. Repeat, no ordinary battery ever made works so hard, so long as the Ever-Ready Alkaline Power Cell. Now you can get a $1 refund on specially marked packages of Ever-Ready Alkaline Power Cells. Details at participating Ever-Ready dealers. Come to the top. Come to the Ever-Ready Alkaline Power Cell.
Let's take a look at the stats for this football game. Minnesota 19 first downs, St. Louis 7. And of course, that's a little bit misleading, as I was just talking about, because within about a minute to go in the first half, the Vikings were in that prevent defense. They picked up about 4 first downs. And then here, with 2 minutes to go in the ball game, they picked up about 3 or 4 first downs, but it really didn't matter. So the Vikings come up with 19 first downs, St. Louis 17. Running the football up front, the blocking was magnificent today for the Minnesota Vikings. They picked up 199 yards rushing on 42 attempts. St. Louis only picked up 100 yards on the ground. In the air, the Vikings picked up 166, St. Louis 184. Net yards, St. Louis 284 today, Minnesota 365 yards. Both of them very close. A number of plays run from the offensive line of scrimmage. The Vikings ran 66 plays, St. Louis 67. Passes completed, well, Hart was 18 out of 40 for their 184 yards. Tarkenton 13 out of 23 for 166 and 2 touchdown passes. Hart had 1 touchdown pass, a 13-yard toss in the first half to Early Thomas. Interceptions, St. Louis had 2, Minnesota 1. Penalties, St. Louis was penalized 15 yards on 1 penalty, and that was a clipping call, and Minnesota got 39 yards in penalties on 4 infractions. Punts, St. Louis averaged 36.4, and Eyeshide on 5 kicks averaged 38.2. St. Louis lost 1 fumble. Minnesota did not fumble the football. Now let's break down those stats individually. For the Cardinals, Metcalf, leading rusher. He got 58 yards on 15 attempts, and his longest run was 13 yards. He got 11-yard touchdown run right at the end of the ball game. Otis, the fullback, 32 yards on 8 carries. His longest run was 12 yards. Willard carried the ball once for no gain. Hart, 18 out of 40, as I said, for 185 and 1 interception. Thomas caught 7 for 76, 1 touchdown. Smith only caught 1 pass today, and I really think that as far as the game plan, this really hurt the St. Louis Cardinal passing attack. You've got to go to your tight end a lot against that Minnesota zone, and Smith, who had an outstanding day against the Vikings in St. Louis on that Monday Night Football game, only caught 1 pass today for 5 yards. Gray caught 4 for 62. He also dropped 3 or 4. Hammond caught 1 for 11 yards. Metcalf caught 4 for 41, his longest being 28 yards there in the second half. On the other side of the ledger, Chuck Foreman, an outstanding day. 110 yards rushing on 22 attempts, his longest run, 14 yards, and he got his touchdown, the last touchdown the Vikings scored, a 3-yard burst over the left side. Ozzie, another outstanding day, 68 yards and 16 carries. His longest run was 12 yards. Tarkenton, 13 out of 23 for 168, 2 interceptions, and 2 touchdowns, both going to John Gilliam, and they were the only passes that Gilly caught today. He caught those 2 for 54 yards, 1 a 16-yard touchdown pass, and 1 a 38-yard bomb in the second half. Lashton was shut out today. It was very unusual because he's had an outstanding year, caught 32 passes on the season, but he was shut out today. Stu Voigt came up with 2 big catches for 25 yards. Foreman, as usual, the leading pass receiver for the Vikings, caught 5 for 54. Ozzie caught 4 for 37. So Foreman today offensively picked up 164 yards on offense. Ozzie picked up 105 yards. Ozzie had 68 yards rushing and 38 yards on pass receiving. So those 2 guys really had themselves quite a day. I thought that Tarkenton called an excellent game. He only had 2 interceptions. He came up with the big play when he needed it, and that has been his forte for many, many years.